Good morning, welcome back. Today is July 18th. We're here to continue our study on Isaiah, but first of all, let's talk a little bit about what happened on this date in history. First of all, in 64 AD, today is the day of the Great Fire of Rome. Now, this is not to be confused with any of the other fires of Rome. This is the Great Fire of Rome. This is the one that supposedly Nero fiddled while it was burning. This is the one that Nero, who was the emperor at the time, blamed the Christians for and was able to start a great persecution, one of the great persecutions of Christians in the Roman Empire. That all took place. The fire itself started on this date in 64 AD. Okay, so it was on this date in 1323 that Thomas Aquinas was declared a saint. Now, Thomas Aquinas was a legal Catholic theologian who created and is responsible for the school of thought known as scholasticism within theology. And in a sense, the big takeaway from Aquinas is that you could take that theology was created, was a science, that it became the queen of the sciences. And that theology is created just through a reasoning application of Scripture, and that was it. And to this day, there's a question today how accurate that really is as far as theology. And maybe when I do a study on just basic theology, that's what I'll talk about. My first thing will be talking about Aquinas and his effect on theology. In 1938, pilot Douglas Corrigan took off from an airfield in Brooklyn, New York. He'd filed a flight plan to travel 2,000 miles back to California, where he had come from a few days prior. Well, 28 hours later, he landed in Ireland, which was 3,000 miles in the complete opposite direction. It was a 3,100 mile trip as opposed to a 2,400 mile trip. And so Mr. Corrigan took up the name and the nickname of Wrong Way Corrigan. Now, he was celebrated in Ireland for making the flight. And the interesting thing about this is that most people kind of believe that Corrigan planned to do this all along, that it wasn't actually a mistake. He had made a couple of requests to be cleared to do this, and they had been turned down. And so I think most people kind of look at this and read the facts and say, no, this is what he intended to do all along. Now, in his defense, Corrigan never actually claimed or admitted that he knew what he was doing all along. To the day he died, which was in the 1990s, he said that it was a mistake, that his compass was old, that weather was overcast, so he didn't see that he was flying over the ocean instead of the great Midwest. And so, kudos to him. But like I said, he got a big parade, big reception, and was notably famous for having made that trip. In 1938, Wrong Way Corrigan. That was on this date. This week, I think it's this week, the Olympics are coming up, and it was on this date in 1976 that Nadia Comaneci at the age of 14, became the first gymnast in Olympic history to get a perfect 10. Nadia Comaneci, the first gymnast to get a perfect 10. Birthdays on this date. In 1887, Vidkun Quisling was born. The Norwegian Minister of Defense, later became the Norwegian Prime Minister, a puppet Prime Minister under the Nazi rule in World War II. Collaborator, basically known as a collaborator. He's sort of the European version of a Benedict Arnold. And in fact, nowadays, if you are called a Quisling, it generally means that you are somebody who is collaborating with the enemy. In 1895, George Machine Gun Kelly was born. George Machine Gun Kelly was born George Kelly Barnes, gangster in the 1930s, was born on this date in 1895. In 1913, entertainer Red Skelton was born. Red Skelton, some of you may remember him, had a TV show, a lot of TV appearances, movie appearances. He was born on this date and famous for painting pictures of clowns. Amongst his skills was painting pictures of clowns. In fact, now you can still get pictures that Red Skelton drew of clowns. And in 1922, Thomas Kuhn was born. Thomas Kuhn. Now, most of us probably don't know who Thomas Kuhn is, but he was a philosopher, writer, wrote a book in the 1990s called The Structure, or 1980s, I should say, called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. And he is the guy who created the idea of the paradigm shift. So if you were in any kind of organization in the 1990s, in the year 2000s, even to this day, people talk about a paradigm shift. You can thank Thomas Kuhn for that wonderful phrase. But he was born in this state in 1922. Among the people who died in this state in 1704 was Baptist Benjamin Keach. Benjamin Keach, who was a Baptist minister, best known for a lot of things, but he was one of the first, if not the first, Baptist to introduce the singing of hymns, actual hymns, into Baptist worship services. Okay, prior to that, if there was any singing in a Baptist service at all, it was singing of psalms. Okay, so he was the one who introduced the idea of singing hymns into the Baptist church service. 1792, John Paul Jones was born. I don't mean the musician, I mean the sailor, Scottish sailor, who was part of the American Navy. He was the one on the Bon-Homme Richard when the British guy on the Serapen said, you going to fight? And he says, I have not yet begun to fight. What most people don't realize is that after the war, John Paul Jones couldn't get a ship in the U.S. Navy anymore because the U.S. kind of decommissioned everything, and so he joined the Russian Navy and joined the Russian Navy after that. In 1817, a sad day, 41-year-old Jane Austen died of Addison's disease. She was only 41, had never been married, was engaged once for, I think, a day, but she was never married, but she died on this date in 1817. And finally, on this date in 1954, George Machine Gun Kelly died of a heart attack in Leavenworth Prison. He had been sent to jail there in 1933, and he died of a heart attack, died in prison on that day. So that's it for what happened on this day. Let's get back to talking about the book of Isaiah. Welcome back. We're here to talk today about Isaiah. Continuing on, today we're going to finish one part and then we're going to move into another. Okay, so quick review: Isaiah, prophet, southern kingdom, around the time of Hezekiah, Ahaz, those guys, around the time of the late 600s, going into the 700s, or I guess it's the other way around. But so Isaiah condemns the city, or condemns the nation in the first 5 chapters. His commission is in chapter 6. 7 through 9 has this test of Ahaz, and then 10 through 23, which is where we're going to get to today, is a series of oracles, these series of pronouncements, things about nations around there. It's kind of it's a comfort to those reading it, to the people in Israel or to the people in exile at the time, because they would be kind of thinking, okay, when is everyone going to get theirs, and all of that, and kind of puts them, just says, listen, God has a plan. And again, in verse, chapter 14, surely as I have planned, so it will be, and as I have purposed, so it will happen. Okay, so again, these are oracles, or these pronouncements, these lists of things that are going to happen to these countries. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the last one. We're in Isaiah 23. Okay, chapter 23, and it's an oracle concerning Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon. Let me read some of it, and then we'll talk a little bit about this. Okay, the oracle concerning Tyre. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for Tyre is laid waste, without house or harbor. From the land of Cyprus it is revealed to them. Okay, Tyre and Sidon. What are Tyre and Sidon? Now these are 2 cities. Okay, so it's Tyre and Sidon is to the north. That are they're part of Phoenicia. They'd be called Phoenician cities, part of the kingdom of Phoenicia. And they were well known for being trading places. Okay, so what's interesting about this particular oracle, okay, so it is that it has to do with an economic devastation, and that's interesting because nowadays, and by nowadays I mean like 2021. It's far more likely that you're going to see economic effects than you're going to see just full-scale invasions which would have been more common in that day. Okay, so it's kind of interesting that here, he's talking to this economic powerhouse. Okay, so Tyre and Sidon are not necessarily military powerhouses, but because of their location, they're north. So in Israel, they're kind of like northwest. I'm sorry. If you're looking on the map, they're on the border of the Mediterranean Sea. So they're great port cities. Okay, so great entry into the Mediterranean. So any business that was coming across the Mediterranean, especially up on the north side, coming out of Asia Minor, what we call Turkey, Greece, coming in that direction, that would come through Tyre and Sidon, especially Tyre here. Okay, so and the city itself, Tyre, and we'll see this because there's a couple of references to it. There were three components to the city. Okay, so there was the port, or there was the coastal city area. Okay, but just off the coast, there were a couple of islands. Okay, and the defense plan for the city was that if the coast was taken, everybody could just kind of go out to these islands and they would survive on these islands. And it worked for a very long period of time. In fact, it wasn't until I think it was Alexander the Great that somebody finally was able to get in and take over Tyre, because they would just retreat to the island, and then the island stronghold would put them at an advantage. Again, until Alexander the Great came along, nobody could get in and do those. Okay, so it's this economic thing, and they would get rich and very economically powerful off of the business that was going in and out. I mean, I don't have a source for this, but I remember reading on a couple of occasions talking about the gold rushes in American history. Sutter's Creek and all of those 1849 gold rush or discovery of gold in California, things like that. That the people who really got rich because of the gold rush were not the gold miners, but those who outfitted the gold miners. Okay, the people who bought the trays for them and the sluices and all of this equipment that people had to buy in order to become a gold miner. So that you didn't have a lot of gold miners getting rich, but you did have these people who were outfitting the gold miners getting rich. Okay, and so that's kind of where Tyre and Sidon are. They're these companies. They're these two cities, part of Phoenicia, that are becoming very rich, very powerful economically. Okay, so this oracle in chapter 23 here is the last of the oracles. Now we'll get to a little conclusion point in a minute, but and it's this economic powerhouse, not the military powerhouse, an economic powerhouse. It's going to go down, and there's basically three parts to it. One of the first part in 23, it just talks about the fall of Tyre and Sidon. Okay, and then verses 8 through 14 talks about God's hand in the fall of Tyre and Sidon, and then in verses 15 through 18 talks about the redemption of Tyre. Okay, it's mostly Tyre, but Sidon is thrown in there a couple of times. Okay, and of course, some of us remember that in Matthew 11, Jesus refers to Tyre and Sidon. In fact, he's giving woe to these other cities, Chorazin, and I forget the other one. And he says, if the miracles that I did in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented. Okay, so they were still well-known cities in Jesus' day. Here, okay, so there's this oracle about Tyre and Sidon. Okay, now one other part of geography. Now, if you remember, if you've ever looked at a map of Europe, you've got Europe along the top, and then you've got Israel underneath, and then you've got Africa. North Africa, Libya and Morocco and all that, okay? And so in between there, you have the Mediterranean, okay? Now, the furthest west point in the Mediterranean was Tarshish, okay? Not Tarsus, which is where Paul is from, but Tarshish, okay? Tarshish is a port city. Now, let me rephrase it. I don't know if it's the furthest west, but it is clearly the other direction. Okay, so if you remember the story of Jonah said go to Nineveh, and Nineveh is this way, and so Jonah says, no, I'm going to go completely the opposite direction, sort of like Douglas Corrigan, says I'm going to go this way, but ends up going the complete opposite direction. Well, it worked out much better for Douglas Corrigan than it did for wrong way Corrigan than it does for Jonah. But that's where Tarshish is, okay? And so you would have these ships that would go back and forth across the Mediterranean, okay? And these other ships needed these port cities in order to do their business. Otherwise, they're just sitting there with all of this stuff that they can't get off their ship. And if it's produce or if it's food or something, it could rot. Okay, so it says here, when talks about this destruction that happens to Tyre and Sidon, it says, "Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for Tyre is laid waste without house or harbor." Okay, so telling these ships that are coming from far away, hey guys, you've got nowhere to land here. Okay, from the land of Cyprus it is revealed to them. Now apparently this Cyprus is kind of in the middle, so they would stop at Cyprus. So apparently the word of the fall of Tyre and Sidon gets to Cyprus, and then when the ships from Tarshish get there, they say, "Hey, where you going?" Tarshish. "Oh, we're going to go to Tyre." "Oh, no, you're not. There's no Tyre there anymore." Okay, so it says, "Be still, O inhabitants of the coast, the merchants of Sidon who cross the sea have filled you." Okay. Now, incidentally, I mean, Tyre and Sidon are both cities that are still around. They're still there. Like Tyre is the third largest city in Lebanon, I think, and Sidon is the fourth. I mean, the location where these cities are. But as far as being economic powers, they're certainly not the economic powers they used to be. Okay, so moving along here in this, okay, "Be still, O inhabitants of the coast." Okay, so then not on the island, but this coast city. "The merchants of Sidon who cross the sea have filled you, and on many waters your revenue was the grain of Shihor, the harvest of the Nile. You were the merchant of the nations." Okay, so again, you were the merchant of the nations, that you were this economic powerhouse. "Be ashamed, O Sidon, for the sea has spoken, the stronghold of the sea, saying, I have neither labored nor given birth. I have neither reared young men nor brought up young women." Okay, so here it's talking to Sidon, and again, Tyre and Sidon are used interchangeably in this, or not necessarily interchangeably, but they're two parts of the same area, the same economic powerhouse. Okay, the sea has spoken and suggesting, and I think the suggestion here is like I said, you're not actually producing anything. You're not, but you're making money off of this situation here. "When the reports come to Egypt," that is the report of the fall of Tyre, "there will be anguish over the report about Tyre. Cross over to Tarshish, wail, O inhabitants of the coast. Is this your exultant city, whose origin is from days of old, whose feet carried her to settle far away?" Okay, so again, the word is going to spread about this, the fall of Tyre and Sidon. Now this destruction of Tyre and Sidon is not a huge military thing. I mean, it is a destruction of a city, don't get me wrong. I mean, there is a battle talking about here. But once they're gone, then you lose that location, and that it was their location as a port that made them influential. Who has purposed this against Tyre, the bestower of crowns, whose merchants were princes, whose traders were honored of the earth? Who did this? Who's behind this? The Lord of hosts has purposed it, to defile the pompous pride of all glory, to dishonor all the honored of the earth. It's interesting, have you ever had a situation where you're talking to somebody and something has happened to him or her, and the reason why it has happened to him and her is painfully obvious. Okay, it's because of something, some action that they did in the past, and you know it and they know it, but they're trying to come up with some alternative reason why. And here they're trying to look for an explanation. Why did Tyre fall? Why did Sidon fall? Who could have done this? Okay, well, verse 9, the Lord of hosts has purposed it. Okay, again, surely as I planned, so it will be, as I have purposed, so it will happen. Isaiah 14:24. To defile the pompous pride of all glory, to dishonor all the honor of the earth. Cross over your land like the Nile, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no restraint anymore. Where am I? He has stretched out his hand over the sea. He has shaken the kingdoms. The Lord has given command concerning Canaan to destroy its strongholds. And he said, you will no more exalt, O oppressed virgin daughter of Sidon. Arise, cross over to Cyprus, even there you will have no rest. Okay, so again, this kind of talking about this destruction of Tyre and what this economic ramifications are going to be. Okay, so again, even though the physical city is located here, and this is where the battle is taking place, the ramifications stretched out his hand over the sea is going to affect all the way to Tarshish. Okay, because again, this was an economic central point that they had to have. Okay, let's see. It says here, cross over your land like the Nile. This is kind of an interesting verse here. Okay, the NIV translates that, till your land as they do the Nile. Okay, so the idea is, okay, what is this? Because again, it's not a very common phrase, and so what is the oracle telling the people here to do? So it's in other words, with Tyre gone, your business is dead, and so one idea is to say, okay, Tyre is going to be gone. You, oh daughter of Tarshish, what are you guys going to do? You don't have these ports anymore. You can't make money trading things. What you might as well become a farmer, till your land. Okay, that's one idea. Okay, the ESV says, as you look at the way the ESV says, O daughter of Tarshish, there is no, cover your land like the Nile. There's no restraint anymore, Tarshish. So you might as well just plunder the place. You go in and plunder it, take it over. Okay, the Lord has given command concerning Canaan to destroy its strongholds. And he said, you will no more exalt or oppress virgin daughter of Sidon. Rise, cross over to Sidon. Even there you will have no rest. Okay. Behold the land of the Chaldeans. This is the people that was not. Assyria destined it for wild beasts. They erected their siege towers. They stripped her palaces bare. They made her a ruin. So it's again, look what happened to the Chaldeans, which are Babylon. Look what happened to them. And this is the same thing that's going to happen to Tyre. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for your stronghold is laid waste. Okay, so again, this is, it ends the same way it begins in verse 14. Okay, it ends the same way. It's wail, O ships of Tarshish, because again, you had this central location that is now gone. Okay, so you might as well become a farmer. And again, this is the ramification of this economic destruction that's going to happen. Now, beginning in verses 15 through 17 here, there's 15 through, 18. Okay, so 15 through 18 is kind of a tricky passage. Okay, it's hard to kind of figure out exactly what is happening here. Okay, some look at this and say, okay, this is kind of talking about the redemption of Tyre and Sidon, similar to, and this has happened before, talked about Egypt, that Egypt was going to serve the Lord, and I think Moab also, they talk about Moab was going to serve the Lord, or Edom, I forgot which one now, but there were other times, I know definitely Egypt, that one day Egypt will serve the Lord. Okay, Egypt and Assyria will get together. Okay, but here it says, in that day, once Tyre is destroyed, in that day Tyre will be forgotten for 70 years, like the days of one king. At the end of 70 years, it will happen to Tyre as in the song of the prostitute. So what did we talk about this 70 years? Okay, now is this 70 years like Daniel talks about in Daniel chapter 9, where it says, I realized, I looked at, Daniel's looking at Jeremiah and realizing that there's a 70 years, that there's a literal 70 years? Or is he speaking of it in kind of a more general, like a lifetime? And I think it's the latter. I think it's the lifetime. And we get that for a couple of reasons. Number one, because Isaiah goes on to say here, in that day will be forgotten for 70 years, like the days of one king. 70 years, like a lifetime. Okay, so you kind of get this softening. Okay, it isn't like it's going to be 70, 365 day units. It's just kind of like a lifetime, okay, which is longer than a single generation. A generation is talking like 20 years-ish, give or take. Okay, so here it's just sort of like for this period of time. And then the other reason is because looking back over this, there isn't really a period of time that we can look at and say, oh, okay, Tyre fell on, I don't know, I'm just making up years here, 700 BC, and it revived at 630, exactly 70 years later. Okay, so and nothing even close, or 68 years or 72 years. Okay, so there were times where it was down and then back up again and down. Okay, so we don't really have a clear historical reference to this. And so I think here he's just saying it's going to be for a while. It's going to be down. It's like a lifetime. It's going to be down. And then it's going to, well, at the end of the 70 years, it will happen to Tyre as in the song of the prostitute. Okay. Now, what is this song of the prostitute? Okay. Well, probably just a song of the day. Okay. We don't, this is not the first time that we talk about songs in Isaiah. It's not the first time we talk about songs in the Bible. And this is just something that the original readers would have known what he's talking about when he says the song of the prostitute. Okay. So looking at this, it just says, take a harp, go about the city, O forgotten prostitute. Make sweet melodies, sing many songs that you may be remembered. Okay. It just said, people are going to walk around singing, thinking what it used to be like. Remember how good things used to be? At the end of verse 17 here, at the end of the 70 years, the Lord will visit Tyre, and she will return to her wages and will prostitute herself with all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. Okay, and I think here, Tyre's going to have a last gasp, but in the end, verse 18, her merchandise and her wages will be holy to the Lord. It will not be stored or hoarded, but her merchandise will supply abundant food and fine clothing for those who dwell before the Lord. So at some point, Tyre will come back, but Tyre will be in service to the Lord, okay? Just like Egypt will be, and all these other, Assyria will be, again. That's kind of part and parcel of this, okay? So that is the last of the oracles of all of these cities that are surrounding Israel, or nation states, countries, people groups, okay, that are surrounding them. And there's ones that are related, there are ones that are antagonistic, there are ones that are economic. Okay, so this is Isaiah's way of telling the people, in his original readers, his original hearers, that look, the Lord has a plan. All of these other countries, the Lord has a plan for Israel, the nation of Israel. He is going to maintain it. Just trust me. Okay, and again, we've gone through this. Who are you going to trust? And this is going to become apparent as we get into the next section. Okay, so that's it as far as those go, those oracles go. Okay, now chapters 24 through 27 are another section, and there's an argument within scholars as far as whether 24 and 27 are a part of, are a single piece. Now again, it isn't likely that Isaiah sat down one day and said, okay, I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to start with, I'm going to write about how bad the city is, the nation is, and then I'm going to do chapter 6. And then I'm going to, okay. It's more likely that Isaiah had a section of writings, that he wrote this down, and somebody later edited it together, okay, at different points in his life. And that's one of the reasons we'll get into that when we get into chapter 40, and we talk about 1st Isaiah, 2nd Isaiah, and all that stuff, okay. But so here in Isaiah 24 through 27, there is kind of a single unit, and it's talking about this major judgment on the earth, okay? Judgment on the whole earth, okay? So I think it's placed here specifically just to kind of say, look, this is the summation of 13 through 23. That is, this is the summation of all of these different oracles, what's going to happen in the end. Another way to look at it is to say, well, look, in case you forgot, in case you think I missed anyone, here, this is what's going to happen to the whole earth. Okay? The whole earth is going to have this happen to it. Okay? So let me read here, starting in 24, and we'll see how far we get. Behold, the Lord will empty the earth and make it desolate, and he will twist its surface and scatter its inhabitants. And it shall be as with the people, so with the priest, as with the slave, so with its master, as with the maid, so with her mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the creditor, so with the debtor. The earth shall be utterly empty and utterly plundered, for the Lord has spoken this word. Okay? Now, this passage begins what is often referred to as the apocalypse of Isaiah. Okay, so 24 through 27, the apocalypse of Isaiah. And it's what's interesting, or the question is this something? Does this indicate something special that's going to happen? Meaning, is the Lord going to step in and do all of this at some point, some arbitrary point in time, or is this something that is going to result from all of the smaller activities? Okay. Another way they put this is this apocalyptic, or is this eschatological? Eschatological meaning this is kind of the natural result of all of the different things. or is it something that the Lord is going to step in? Okay, and I think really, and there are people that go both sides here, but I think really, looking at the text itself, it's a both and. Okay, so there is an element of our participation or people's participation in this, and all of these things that are going to happen, and we'll point those out when we get to them. Okay, but there is a special element where the Lord is going to step in. Okay, now the other thing that's really interesting about this is, as you read through Revelation 20, as you read through 24 through 27, these 4 chapters especially, there's a lot of things that are going to sound very familiar, especially if you know the book of Revelation. Okay, now is this presupposing, or is this giving the idea, is it focusing on the same thing? I don't know, but I'm fairly certain that when John was writing Revelation and he was seeing things, part of his vision, and he was seeing how things were going to play out in the future, that these phrases and these concepts that Isaiah introduces here are in his head. And he says, oh, it's going to be like that. Like Isaiah said, this is where, okay, so again, so any discussion of eschatology, the doctrine of eschatology, that is the doctrine of last things, and we'll come to this passage and go, okay, here, Isaiah starts talking about it here, and then John builds on it in the book of Revelation, okay? And we'll see some of those things as we get going, okay? So again, that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. Okay, so the first 3 verses just talk about the devastation. It's going to hit everybody, okay, as with the servants of the masters, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, the whole earth shall be utterly empty and utterly plundered. Okay, now this is this idea of plundering suggests that there's some human participation here, okay, result of battle kind of thing. Now, when it says empty, utterly empty, does this mean there will be absolutely no humans left on the earth? Okay, well, you could go with that. Okay, I think he's more referring to sort of a figurative approach, because later on he's going to talk about a few being left and a few men are left. Okay, so I think it's just, he kind of emptied it out, but there's still a remnant. Okay, and we'll talk about that remnant, because there's this remnant idea comes up here a couple of times. For the Lord has spoken this word. Okay, so again, as reinsurance, at some point, this everything's going to be changed. The earth mourns and withers. The world languishes and withers. The highest people of the earth languish. The earth lies defiled under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed the laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. Okay, the earth mourns and withers. The highest people of the earth language, those who should know better. Okay, the highest people of the earth shall language. The earth lies defiled under its inhabitants. Now I think here that you can really make a case for what's called creation care. Okay, that's the Biblish word. Biblish is a phrase that Sandra Richter used in her Epic of Eden thing, which is a really interesting word. It's a kind of like a Bible-esque, so Bible-related, even though it's not. So creation care, it's like the evangelical way to talk about environmentalism. Okay, creation care, and I think you could use this passage to talk about it. That if you're going to kind of develop an idea or a theology of creation care, you're going to come back to this particular passage here. But regardless, why is the Lord doing this? Okay, because they have, verse 5, they have transgressed the laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. Okay, and I don't think that necessarily these are 3 specific, different things, as much as he's just saying they've broken everything. They've disobeyed in every way possible, and now the time has come. Therefore, verse 6, a curse devours the earth, and its inhabitants suffer for their guilt. Okay, so there's a curse as a result of all this disobedience. Okay, now I think here, he's referring. He could be referring to the original curse of sin. Okay, and that is that there's this curse over the earth, and everyone's suffering for their guilt. Okay, and they're suffering because they're guilty. Okay, it's not the guilt that is this. It's not that they're, oh, I feel so guilty. It's not that. It's because they're guilty. They're suffering. Okay, you see what I'm saying here? Okay, so that's not. It's not a discussion of the effects of guilt in a person's life. It's the effect of you're feeling guilt because you're guilty because you did something, and that's why you're suffering. Okay. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are scorched, and few men are left. Okay. Again, here's if it's utterly empty in the sense that there are literally no one here, you got suddenly a few men are back. Now, is this the remnant? Perhaps. Okay. The wine mourns, the vine languishes, all the merry-hearted sigh. The mirth of the tambourines is stilled, the noise of the jubilant has ceased, the mire of the lyre is stilled. No more do they drink wine with singing. Among strong drink is bitter to those who drink it. So remember when we talked about Isaiah 22, when Isaiah was giving this oracle about Babylon and about Jerusalem, and he had two different examples of it where it says, I'm giving you this bad news and you're having a party. Okay, so again, here it's like, no, there's not going to be a party at this point. Not going to be a party here. What used to be fun isn't going to be fun anymore. Okay, the wasted city is broken down. Every house is shut up so that none can enter. This wasted city, the word there is tohu. Okay, and that says in the tohu navahu, that without form and void from Genesis. Okay, this chaos, this is kind of the devastation is talked about here. The wasted city is broken down. Every house is shut up so that none can enter. There is an outcry in the streets for lack of wine. All joy has grown dark. The gladness of the earth is banished. Desolation is left in the city. The gates are battered into ruins. For thus it shall be in the midst of the earth among the nations, as when an olive tree is beaten, as at the gleaning when the grape harvest is done. Okay, so basically it just says it's going to be empty. Okay, so if you've ever seen an olive tree, what they do with the olive trees, and we saw this in Israel when we were there, is you have this tree and the olive branches going up, and you don't necessarily pick olives the same way you would pick an apple. They would spread a tarp around the bottom of the tree, and then they would shake the tree, or they would beat the tree with a stick, and that movement was just enough so that it would make all of the olives drop. So the olives would drop onto this tarp. And you shake the tree, you beat the tree, the olives drop, and now the tree is empty of olives. Okay, so again, everything's going to be picked. Everything's going to be gone. Okay, same thing when the grape harvest is done. You're going to have the vines, but you're not going to have any grapes. Okay, so again, this devastation that's happening to the world. Why? Because they've disobeyed in every way possible. Okay, now, verse 14 starts a little section that's kind of odd. Here it says, they lift up their voices, they sing for joy over the majesty of the Lord, they shout from the west. Therefore in the east give glory to the Lord. In the coastlands of the sea give glory to the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. From the ends of the earth we hear songs of praise, of glory to the righteous one. Okay, now who is doing this singing? I don't know. Okay, it's not clear in the text who is doing this singing. Okay, it's probably not the people who are being walking around in the streets looking for lack of wine. All joy has grown dark. So somebody is singing, and there's a couple of options, and one of them is to say this. Maybe this is the heavenly host that Isaiah is talking about, because the heavenly host is seeing this, and the same, and saying, the same heavenly host that sang when the birth of Jesus is announced, and they see that this is a major step forward in God's ultimate plan, and they say this is a good thing, okay, for them. It could be the remnant, okay. It could be the remnant that's either left or it has returned. It could be those who are seeing God's hand. Okay, we don't know. We know someone is singing, but we don't know who. Okay, and what they're singing is praise to the Lord because this is part of His plan. Okay, this end thing is part of His plan. But I say, not second half of verse 16, but I, that is Isaiah, I waste away, woe is me, For the traitors have betrayed. With betrayal, the traitors have betrayed. Okay? So again, remember back when we talked about chapter 20. Remember back when we talked about chapter 21, said, a traitor, a stern vision is told to me, Isaiah says, the traitor betrays and the destroyer destroys. Now, here Isaiah is looking at what has happened and that plundering that was going on. And again, this is that human participation. So the destruction that happens isn't all simply God bringing an angelic army, although that's, you go into Revelation, that's a component. But here, there's human participation in it here. And I think this is why he's wasted away because of this. It's like we did this to ourselves. And why was it that they did? Well, they didn't trust God. Okay, they trusted in these guys these political alliances, and look what it got them. Okay. Verses 17 through 20 kind of give a real graphic description of what this is going to look like. Terror and the pit and the snare are upon you, O inhabitant of the earth. He who flees at the sound of the terror shall fall into the pit. He who climbs out of the pit shall be caught in the snare. For the windows of heaven are open and the foundations of the earth tremble. The earth is utterly broken. The earth is split apart. The earth is violently shaken. The earth staggers like a drunken man. It sways like a hut. Its transgressions lie heavy upon it, and it falls, and it will not rise again. Okay, here, when this was first written, and for hundreds of years afterwards, people would read this and would not be able to imagine how something like this could occur. Okay, and that is not to say that God couldn't do it. Obviously, a God who can create the world out of nothing can do this. Okay, I'm not questioning that. But nowadays, in the nuclear age, which we've been in for 75 years, okay, we look at this and go, yeah, I can see that. I can see that happening. I can see us doing that to ourselves, causing such devastation on earth that it would cause this kind of destruction. Okay. On that day, verse 21, on that day the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven and the kings of earth on earth. They will be gathered together as prisoners in a pit. They will be shut up in a prison. Okay. Now it's interesting. I think there's some passages in Revelation 20 and 22 talking about this. So what is the host of heaven that the Lord is going to punish? Well, I don't know. Maybe the fallen angels, perhaps. Okay, but there is this punishment that's coming. Okay. So I think Revelation 20 and 22, those kind of rely on this passage when he said death and hell are cast into the lake of fire. Okay, and after many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be confounded and the sun ashamed, for the Lord of hosts reigns on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and his glory will be before his elders. Okay, in Revelation 21, the 21-23, it says the city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light. So when John is writing this, do you think he's thinking back to this passage in Isaiah, which would have been very well known to any religious person in Israel at the time? The moon will be confounded and the sun ashamed. So they're going to be hiding. They're not going to be giving light. They're not going to be visible. Why? Because the Lord of hosts reigns on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and his glory will be before the elders. Okay, so kind of talking about that phrase. So, okay, now next time we're going to start in on, we're going to finish this passage. We're going to talk about 25, 26, and 27. And there are some very well-known phrases and things that we talk about here in these passages that we're going to get. So a couple more of Isaiah's greatest hits are going to come up here in next week when we talk about these next 3 chapters. So, hope to see you again here. And if you have any questions, let me know. And otherwise, thanks, and see you next time.